Good morning. My name is Perry Franklin, and I will serve as your facilitator for the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion virtual public meeting. Today, we'll be talking about the Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or more commonly known as the EIS, and Draft Natural Resource Damage Assessment Restoration Plan, or commonly known as the RP, for the proposed Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion project. Please keep in mind that both of these documents are still in draft form, and today we are requesting your feedback to make our final decision. Thank you for your interest in this proposed project and for attending today's virtual meeting. Whether you are listening in via telephone or your computer's audio, please know that we will have all incoming audio muted at this time. If you are experiencing technical difficulties and would like to request assistance, please use the questions box, which is located on the right-hand side of the webinar interface, and we will try to help you. We have a court reporter who will transcribe the entire meeting, including your important comments. We are also joined by several language translators who will be introduced shortly. The recording of today's webinar will be posted on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers webpage, along with the written transcript of this morning's meeting in the near future. We will share that link with you in the chat box. The PowerPoint presentation and today's transcript will also be posted on the Deepwater Horizon Trustee Council website. When you registered for the webinar, you were asked if you would like to make a verbal comment. We have received a number of requests and have responded to each person via email with instructions on how to make verbal comments to our listening panel. After the presentation portion of the webinar, we will take your public comments. If you didn't make a request to provide a public comment before this meeting, that's okay, as it is not too late to speak. We will explain how to do so shortly. One last note, if you are joining us only via phone and are not connected to the webinar system, you will not be able to make a comment during this meeting. If you're calling in over the phone and you're not connected to a computer and would like to make a public comment, please call 866-211-9205. Again, that's 866-211-9205 at any time before May 4th. We will review all methods for submitting public comments towards the end of this morning's webinar. Now I'd like to introduce you to the folks that you will be hearing from this morning, either live or via video recording. In addition to myself, you will hear from Brad Laborde, who is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Brad Barth from the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, or CPRA, as well as Mel Landry, who represents the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or commonly known as NOAA. We also have several language translators with us today who will translate any public comments that are received in Spanish, Vietnamese, or Khmer. There will be more on this later. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded. We thank you in advance for using respectful language during your public comment and for adhering to the 3-minute rule per your comment. All comments will be made available to the public and gathered as a part of the public record. The public comment period is open again until May 4th. We are accepting public comments in a number of ways, including written comment by U.S. mail, electronic comments via our web-based system, voicemail on a free phone line, and this morning during our public comment portion of the webinar, which will follow the presentations. Please note that you only need to submit your comment via one of these ways for it to become a part of the public record. This morning's webinar will start with approximately 35 minutes of video presentations, which cover details of the proposed project. Then we will move into the public comment portion of the webinar. The webinar will run for a total of 3 hours. The video that will be shown shortly is in English. But if you would like to listen to the video in Spanish, Vietnamese, or Khmer, we have audio recordings available at toll-free numbers that will be listed on the following slides. Now, we will hear from each of our translators we have with us today. First will be Spanish, then Vietnamese, and finally Khmer. Ms. Soto.
Thank you. El seminario web de hoy comenzará con aproximadamente 35 minutos de presentaciones de video que cubrirán detalles del proyecto propuesto. El video se muestra en inglés aquí, pero si llama al 855-786-7103, otra vez 855-786-7103, escuchará la presentación en español. Luego del video pasaremos a la sección de comentarios del público acerca del seminario web. El seminario web de hoy será en inglés, sin embargo, estará en el seminario web para traducir sus comentarios si es que desea hacerlo en español. El seminario web dura un total de 3 horas. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nguyen.
Good morning. Hội thảo trên web của ngày hôm nay sẽ bắt đầu với khoảng 35 phút. Trình chiếu video bao gồm các chi tiết của dự án được đề xuất. Video được hiển thị ở đây bằng tiếng Anh, nhưng nếu bạn gọi 855 786 7103, bạn sẽ nghe thất bại thuyết trình bằng tiếng Việt. Sau video, chúng tôi sẽ chuyển sang phần bình luận công khai của hội thảo trên web. Hội thảo trên web hôm nay sẽ bằng tiếng Anh. Tuy nhiên, tôi sẽ tham gia hội thảo trên web để dịch nhận xét của bạn nếu bạn muốn đưa ra bằng tiếng Việt. Hội thảo trên web sẽ diễn ra trong tổ cộng 3 giờ. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Mr. Tay. Mr. Tay, you're on mute.
ជំរាបសួរសិក្ខាសាលាតាមអ៊ីនធឺណិតនៅថ្ងៃនេះនឹងចាប់ផ្ដើមឡើងដោយបទបង្ហាញវីដេអូប្រហែលជាចំនួន35នាទីដែលរៀបរាប់លម្អិតអំពីគម្រោងដែលស្នើធ្វើឡើងវីដេអូដែលបង្ហាញនេះនឹងធ្វើតាមជាភាសាអង់គ្លេសប៉ុន្តែបើសិនជាអ្នកហៅទូរស័ព្ទទៅលេខ866 អ្នកនឹងស្ដាប់វីដេអូនោះតាមភាសាខ្មែរបន្ទាប់ពីវីដេអូយើងនឹងបន្តទៅផ្នែកមតិសាធារណៈនៃសិក្ខាសាលាតាមអ៊ីនធឺណិតនេះសិក្ខាសាលាតាមអ៊ីនធឺណិតនៅថ្ងៃនេះនឹងធ្វើឡើងជាភាសាអង់គ្លេសប៉ុន្តែខ្ញុំនឹងចូលរួមសិក្ខាសាលាតាមអ៊ីនធឺណិតនេះដើម្បីជួយបកប្រែមតិរបស់អ្នកប្រសិនជាអ្នកចង់ផ្ដល់មតិទាំងនោះជាភាសាខ្មែរសិក្ខាសាលាតាមអ៊ីនធឺណិតនេះនឹងប្រព្រឹត្តទៅក្នុងចំនួនពេលប្រហែលជា3ម៉ោងសូមអរគុណ
Thank you to our translators. And at this time, we will transition to the video presentation.
Hello, and welcome to the public meeting presentation for the proposed Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion project. My name is Brad Laborde. I'm the regulatory project manager for the proposed Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion project and part of the Corps of Engineers review team in charge of developing this environmental impact statement, or EIS, here at the New Orleans district. This pre-recorded presentation is available to you on the Corps of Engineers Mid-Baritaria project webpage. Myself and the Corps review team thank you for sacrificing your time to actively participate and provide your feedback on this draft EIS. Ideally, we would host these public meetings in person, but due to the ongoing public health crisis, we cannot at this time. Again, we thank you for your participation under these circumstances. There are 3 presentations available to you. Each will cover a different aspect of the proposed Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project review. The core presentation will identify engaged parties and outline our roles in this review, provide an update since the scoping period, show you how and where to submit your comments, and then I'll walk you through the draft EIS to help with your review. Brad Barth from the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, or CPRA, will present project-specific information about the proposed Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project. Mel Landry from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has a presentation covering another key document the EIS will inform, the draft Phase 2 Restoration Plan. NOAA is presenting on behalf of the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group, or TIG. During our live virtual meetings, the pre-recorded presentations will run in the order shown here. It is important for you to understand the roles each of us play in this process. First is the public. Your feedback is valuable to us. In 2017, we held scoping meetings and asked, what would you like to see analyzed? Now we are coming to you once again with a draft EIS to ask, how do we do, so that we can consider your comments for the final EIS. The Corps is the lead federal agency in preparing the EIS. Due to the complexity of the proposed Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project review, the Corps has an independent third-party contractor with a team of subject matter experts to help analyze information and prepare the EIS. The Corps' role is strictly in a regulatory capacity. We are neither an opponent nor a proponent of the proposed Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project. We are tasked with making sure the EIS is based on the best available science, engineering, and professional judgment. Publishing the draft EIS is another milestone in our ongoing review. The Corps' decision to deny, approve, or proffer a least damaging alternative will not be made until after the final EIS. In addition to our independent third-party contractor, the Corps has assistance from cooperating agencies who also have teams of experts to assist with analyzing information and drafting the EIS. Many cooperating agencies also use the EIS to inform their laws and regulations. CPRA is a proponent of the proposed Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project. The project is part of their larger coastal master plan. CPRA is proposing to construct, operate, and maintain this project. The TIG is made up of a number of federal and state agencies, which includes some cooperating agencies and CPRA that will be using the EIS as a tool to help determine whether or not to fund CPRA's proposed project. The Corps is not a TIG agency, but we work closely with the TIG and other cooperating agencies to agree to the EIS schedule and processes leading up to the publication of the draft EIS. This shows some of our key milestones, starting with the public scoping process in July 2017. During the scoping period, you gave us great feedback, submitting over 870 comments. We took your comments and asked CPRA to respond to them, which required them to use a number of scientific models. CPRA's modeling information and technical reports were reviewed by the Corps and our independent third-party contractor, the TIG, and our other cooperating agencies. The Corps' independent third-party contractor then drafted the EIS chapter by chapter, based in part by CPRA's modeling and technical reports, the TIG and cooperating agency comments, and other best available science. The comment period from March 5th to May 4th, 2021 is your opportunity to submit your feedback and answer the question of how did we do? Your feedback will again be considered for the final EIS. Once complete, the final EIS will have another comment period and lead to the Corps record of decision or permit decision scheduled for spring of next year. Since I've mentioned it a few times now, let's walk through the Corps Mid-Barataria project webpage. On the right in purple, you will find materials related to our live virtual meetings under the Draft EIS Meeting Materials title. All core draft EIS public notices and links for the presentations can be found here. After our live virtual meetings, the recordings will be placed under the DEIS Meeting Recordings title. And under the Previous Meetings title, the 2017 Scoping Meeting presentation is available in case you need a refresher about the Corps' regulatory involvement or a better understanding of the EIS process. On the right in green, we have information about ways to submit your written and oral comments. I will show you the comment portal on the next slide. Below that in gold, you will see EIS documents. It is where the entire draft EIS and 2017 scoping report are stored. If you click Draft EIS, a box will open as shown in the callout. Place your cursor over the chapter you wish to review and click. Shortly after, a PDF version of that chapter will open. At the bottom here, I provided the link, but if you Google Core Mid-Baritaria, the top result should be this page. The second result should be another link shown here for the permitting dashboard. This example is for another project, but it gives you an idea of what to expect when you access the comment portal. It will have a project page first. If you click the Comment Now box, it will direct you to another page where you can enter your name, location, and comment in the available fields as shown here. Please notice that the comment portal is located on a National Park Service website. We are using this site because it helps us manage and sort the comments you submit for the draft EIS and restoration plan. The Corps and the TIG have full access to the material submitted here in real time, so you should have no concerns using this for your commenting. Now that I've discussed the engaged parties, updated you on our milestones, and showed you how to navigate the Core Mid-Baritaria project webpage, I'll turn it over to Brad Barth and Mel Landry for their presentations.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Brad Barth, the Mid-Basin Sediment Diversion Program Manager with the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. Today, I'll be sharing some information specific to the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion Project. As I mentioned, I'm with CPRA, the state of Louisiana's single state agency responsible for spearheading all effort related to coastal protection and restoration. This includes developing Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan, which is a tool that helps the state prioritize funding and the implementation of coastal restoration projects across our coast. Sediment diversions are the cornerstone projects of the master plan, designed to reconnect the Mississippi River to our starved basins and reestablish the natural land building processes that originally built our delta. There are numerous factors that have contributed to Louisiana's land loss crisis. As some of you know, our state has lost over 2,000 square miles of land since the 1930s. Barataria Basin, the proposed project location, has actually experienced some of the highest rates of land loss in the world. There are several causes for our land loss, including sea level rise and subsidence, where the water level in the Gulf continues to rise as our land continues to sink, as well as other effects of climate change. Barataria Basin is also home to some of the wetlands that were most heavily oiled during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The extensive oiling and subsequent response activities significantly accelerated land loss in this area. Other man-made contributions, like privately owned projects and oil and gas canals, have caused land loss. And probably most importantly, our current levee system, which protects our communities, has cut off the Mississippi River from depositing sediment, nutrients, and fresh water into our basins. This natural land building process, where the Mississippi River deposits sediment, sands, silts, and clays to strengthen and nourish our marshes, is how coastal Louisiana was built in the first place. As you can see here, when we built our current levee system, the red lines on the map on the right, we restricted the river from strengthening and building our marshes. A sediment diversion is designed to reconnect the river and reestablish the natural flow of sediment and nutrients out into our basins. Sediment diversions, including the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion, are projects the state of Louisiana has been planning and working on for decades. Plans to reconnect the river are not new, but planning for the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion picked up momentum in the 1980s with both state and federal agencies. By the late 2000s, significant sediment and river data collection efforts in support of sediment diversions began. This data collection continues to this day. In 2011, the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion was proposed at River Mile 61 to optimize the power of the river and the land building potential. In 2012, the Coastal Master Plan recommended the project as a priority. As such, CPRA embarked on the engineering, design, and permitting of the project. The 2017 Coastal Master Plan again recommended the project as a cornerstone project. Cornerstone projects are Louisiana's best tools to build and sustain land. The proposed project location is in Plaquemines Parish on the west bank of the Mississippi River at River Mile 61 near the town of Ironton. And here you'll see a visual rendering of what the project might look like once constructed. The Mississippi River is at the bottom of your screen, flowing from right to left, and the basin is located at the top of the screen. Features include an inlet basin in the Mississippi River, a gate complex consisting of a U-frame and a gate structure, a guide levee and channel system, and an outlet basin. During high river, sediment enters the inlet basin, flows through the gate complex, guide levees and channel, and through the outlet basin where the sediment is then slowed to begin deposition and formation of new land. The gate complex allows for control and closure of the diversion during critical times, such as a tropical storm or hurricane events. As such, the gate complex is integrated with our current levee systems. Other features include bridges for Louisiana Highway 23 and the New Orleans Gulf Coast Railroad. So, moving forward, it's important to understand all the coordinating agencies and entities involved in this process. CPRA is the agency in Louisiana responsible for planning, engineering, and design of the project. We work in close coordination with the lead federal agency, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, to provide them information as needed, where CPRA is the applicant for the Joint Section 10404 permit application. I will now turn it over to Mel Landry with the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group, or Louisiana TIG, who will explain the Louisiana TIG's role in this process.
Hi, I'm Mel Landry, and I'm with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, commonly referred to as NOAA. In this presentation, I'll introduce you to the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group and our role in the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion. The Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group, or LATIG, is the group of coordinating federal and state agencies responsible for overseeing the use of the Deepwater Horizon natural resource damages settlement dollars allocated to Louisiana. The Louisiana TIG drafted the restoration plan, which is the document that details the evaluation and recommendation of the LATIG to fund the construction of the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion to restore resources injured by the Deepwater Horizon spill. The Deepwater Horizon spill began nearly 11 years ago on April 20th, 2010, when the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded off the coast of Louisiana and sank to the floor a mile deep in the Gulf of Mexico, 50 miles off the coast of Louisiana. 11 workers on the rig lost their lives, and oil flowed from the seafloor for 87 days. The Barataria Basin was the epicenter of oiled wetlands. Oil worsened existing erosion, and efforts to clean up the oil resulted in additional wetland damage. The agencies that are now members of the Louisiana TIG, as well as other agencies in states across the Gulf, immediately began collecting data to determine the extent of the injuries caused by the spill. Even before the full extent of the damage was known, the agencies began work to restore the ecosystem through $1 billion in early restoration funds provided by BP. 5 years ago, in 2016, the agencies reached a settlement with BP and the responsible parties that provided up to $8.8 billion in funding to restore the natural resources damaged across the Gulf of Mexico by the spill. Over half of that funding, $5 billion, is allocated to the Louisiana restoration area and is managed by the Louisiana TIG. Of that $5 billion, over $4 billion are allocated to restoring and conserving habitat in Louisiana. This large investment in habitat in Louisiana is in recognition not only of the large impact in the state, but also the benefit that the restoration of that habitat can provide to the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem. Our work on Deepwater Horizon restoration is guided by the Programmatic Damage Assessment and Restoration Plan, which we refer to as the PDARP. The PDARP was part of the settlement and is the overarching restoration plan that guides the development of all other subsequent restoration plans. The PDARP does not state exactly what projects should occur where, but it does guide us in the selection of the types of projects that we might plan throughout the entire Gulf of Mexico region. The PDARP recognizes the potential value of large-scale sediment diversions in restoring the resources injured by the spill. Building on the framework provided by the PDARP, in 2018, the Louisiana TIG finalized a Barataria Basin Strategic Restoration Plan that identified a combination of restoration approaches that would support restoration of the injuries in the Barataria Basin. That plan identified 3 projects for further development and evaluation: large-scale Barataria marsh creation, Spanish Pass Ridge and marsh restoration, and the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion. Large-scale Barataria marsh creation and Spanish Pass Ridge and marsh restoration each underwent design and evaluation in subsequent Phase 2 restoration plans and have been funded for construction. Today, we're here to present to you and hear your input on the Phase 2 Restoration Plan 3.2 for the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion. The objectives of the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion are to restore injuries from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, to deliver fresh water, sediment, and nutrients to the Barataria Basin through a large-scale sediment diversion, to reconnect and reestablish sustainable deltaic processes between the Mississippi River and the Barataria Basin, and to create, restore, and sustain wetlands and other deltaic habitats. By redirecting freshwater, sediment, and nutrients from the Mississippi into the Barataria Basin, the diversion is projected to create or sustain over 17,000 acres of marsh at its peak. Based on the sea level rise scenario used in our evaluation, the total acreage created or sustained is reduced by year 50, but is still substantial. Critically, at that point, the marshes created or sustained by the diversion represent 20% of all the marsh that is projected to remain in the Barataria Basin. The wetlands created and sustained by the diversion will restore injuries caused by the Deepwater Horizon spill by creating habitat and supporting the many resources that rely on that habitat. Some of the key benefits of the diversion are comprehensive and sustainable regional ecosystem restoration. The diversion is designed to maintain created wetlands over a long period of time without additional construction. The diversion creates and protects coastal marshes that provide habitat and reduce storm surge during large storms. The diversion is anticipated to improve the effectiveness and longevity of other marsh restoration projects, including the nearby projects that work to restore the Barataria land bridge. The diversion will provide aquatic and terrestrial species benefits, including largemouth bass, red drum, Gulf menhaden, bay anchovy, white shrimp, and blue crab. It also provide recreational use benefits, such as duck hunting, bird watching, and fishing. A key to the success of the project is being able to monitor and adapt the project based on what we learn. There is no other project like this in the world, so our analysis of the project's potential effect is based on extensive computer and large-scale physical modeling that help us understand how the river, the diversion, and the basin work. Once the diversion is operating, we can also use data from the field to maximize project benefits and reduce adverse effects while still maintaining the project's objectives. Restoring a deltaic process that has been absent at this scale in the Barataria Basin for approximately 100 years is expected to result in significant changes to the ecosystem. In addition to the benefits I've discussed, some resources will experience collateral injuries caused by the diversion. In recognition of these, the Louisiana TIG is proposing a suite of stewardship measures to help address the effects on resources and communities. One of the most visible and most impacted resources will be bottlenose dolphins. Approximately 2,000 dolphins live in the Barataria Basin. These dolphins are expected to remain in the basin as salinities decrease with diversion operation. Exposure to low salinity water and other stressors is expected to reduce the annual survival rate for dolphins across most of the basin. The Louisiana TIG and CPRA have developed a suite of measures in anticipation of impacts to dolphins and to meet the requirements of legislation that directed NOAA to issue a waiver under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The effects on dolphins will be monitored beginning with baseline data collection before operations. To help support dolphin stocks across the state, the Louisiana TIG will fund efforts to reduce stressors, as well as continued funding of the statewide marine mammal stranding network. With data from operations, CPRA will evaluate the potential to modify operations to reduce impacts to dolphins while meeting project objectives. Lastly, funding will be set aside as a contingency to support response to potential unusual mortality events, or UMEs, that could be declared based on dolphin deaths in the Barataria Basin. Some fishery resources of commercial value will also be impacted. Due to salinity changes in the basin, brown shrimp and oyster populations will be reduced and/or relocated. It's worth noting that some changes to these resources would continue to occur without the project as current trends continued in the basin. But with the projects, these effects will be accelerated. Measures to address impacts to oysters include establishment of new public seed grounds, providing culture material for public and private growing areas, enhancement of oyster broodstock reefs, and assistance with implementing off-bottom culture techniques. For shrimp, efforts include provisioning of vessel refrigeration to improve catch quality and value, and funding gear improvements to increase efficiency. For both fisheries, investments will be made in training to improve existing business or transition to new careers, and funding of marketing to improve value of catch. Through other restoration planning, the Louisiana TIG has already committed $26 million to oyster restoration, including development and operations of the oyster hatchery on Grand Isle, development of a brood reef program, and past and future placement of culture material on public seed grounds. Diverting water into the Barataria Basin will increase water levels and is expected to impact communities outside of levee systems. Subsidence and sea level rise are predicted to increase flooding in most of these areas to nearly year-round by 27, even without the diversion. But diversion operations are anticipated to result in more frequent inundation in the near term. For example, at Grand Bayou, proposed project operations are projected to increase the number of days of flooding by 45 days per year in 2030, but by only 5 days per year in 2050 in comparison to the future without project. Because most homes outside the levee systems are elevated, it's not anticipated that operations will flood structures, but will cause more frequent inundation of roads, docks, and other infrastructure, like sewage treatment systems. To address impacts, the project includes funding to raise homes, roads, and improve community infrastructure, and to address needs on individual properties such as docks and septic systems. CPRA is also proposing voluntary easements in communities outside of levee systems to compensate owners for property impacts. CPRA is open to discussion regarding fee acquisition of property if requested by the landowner. Lastly, data from operations will be used to evaluate operational regimes that limit impacts while meeting project objectives. This is an overview of the process we've discussed today, from the beginning of our work on the PDARP through the release of this draft Phase 2 restoration plan. Based on public input, we'll release a final restoration plan that will incorporate the feedback we get from you during this public review period. In parallel with our Deepwater Horizon restoration planning process, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has led the development of a draft environmental impact statement, or EIS, as part of their permit process. You'll learn more about that in their presentation on the draft EIS. We want to hear from you. You can submit comments on the restoration plan through the web address, mailing address, or phone number listed on this slide. Unless specified otherwise, or applicable to only one document, any comments submitted will be considered in the Louisiana TIG restoration plan and the EIS. So you only need to submit your comment once. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Brad and Mel. Now that you are up to date on the project details and the draft Phase 2 restoration plan, I'll explain the draft EIS in more detail. The draft environmental impact statement for the proposed Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion project is approximately 1,600 pages. It is a very large document with material that can get technical at times. Some of you may read the draft EIS from cover to cover, but most of you will have interest in only a couple areas of the document. By going through what is available to you in each chapter of the draft EIS, I hope to make finding what you wish to review a little bit easier. First is the table of contents. Use it as your guide to the draft EIS. Each chapter is broken into sections and then more specific subsections like the example for Chapter 3 shown here. Notice that the page numbers begin with the chapter, 3 in this case, then the page number where the topic begins. The table of contents also includes the page numbers to all of the tables and figures in the draft EIS. It also includes the list of appendices. Next is the executive summary. The executive summary describes the proposed action, lists the purpose and need along with the alternatives analyzed in the draft EIS, and summarizes the potential environmental impacts. The executive summary is intended to be a non-technical and condensed version of the draft EIS. If you plan to comment or have an interest in the proposed project, you may want to begin your review with this section of the draft EIS. Reading it may give you all the information you need, or it can help you flag chapters and sections of the draft EIS you may want to review in more detail. Chapter 1 establishes the draft EIS purpose and need. The purpose and need statement is considered to be a foundational piece of the document because it helps determine which alternatives will be carried forward in the EIS analysis. As we have discussed, this draft EIS serves many different agencies, but for the Corps, the meat of the purpose and need statement is underlined for you here. You can also reference Chapter 1 for project background and history, a summary of previous studies, a list of Corps of Engineers civil works projects within the proposed Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion project area, EIS scope and relevant issues, and a list of agency roles and responsibilities. Chapter 2 is where you will find information about the alternatives evaluated in the draft EIS. It explains how the Corps, in coordination with the TIG and cooperating agencies, developed a screening criteria to evaluate a wide range of alternatives, including coastal restoration methods, project locations, flow capacity, and operational triggers to arrive at the range of alternatives shown here. The draft EIS carries forward 6 alternatives and the no action alternative for further analysis. The 6 alternatives are all sediment diversions at variable maximum flow rates. A variable flow up to 75,000 cubic feet per second, which is CPRAs, or the applicant's preferred alternative. A variable flow of up to 50,000 cubic feet per second, and a variable flow of up to 150,000 cubic feet per second. Marsh terracing in the outfall area was an alternative considered for each flow capacity. I included a marsh terracing example over to the side for you, but in general, they are designed to be little sediment catchers. Chapter 2 also includes a comparative summary of all the potential impacts for each alternative. If you are a casual reviewer, after the executive summary, this table, Table 2.9-1, will help you understand the construction and operational impact determinations for each alternative listed here. The Affected Environment chapter gives a description of the existing conditions and trends in the project area, which may be affected by each alternative. It establishes a baseline that we can then use to evaluate impacts in Chapter 4, the Environmental Consequences chapter. Chapters 3 and 4 are broken down into 22 distinct resource areas as listed here. The Environmental Consequences chapter is perhaps the most important chapter of the draft EIS because it explains the potential positive and negative impacts for each sediment diversion alternative in comparison to the trends and conditions from Chapter 3. Chapter 4 is where you would go if you want a more technical explanation of the proposed project's direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts during construction and operation. In the draft EIS, construction impacts are considered over a 5-year time frame. The operational impacts spanned over a 50-year projection. Impacts are assessed for both context and intensity. Context helps you understand the duration of an impact and uses terms like temporary, short-term, long-term, and permanent. Intensity helps you understand the severity of an impact and uses terms like no impact and negligible, minor, moderate, or major impacts. For each resource, the context and intensity is defined, followed by the analysis of each alternative in comparison to the no action. Each section ends with the impact determination. In addition to impacts, Chapter 4 includes a mitigation summary outlining CPRA's proposed avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures. By now, you've heard a lot about the core permit decision and the TIG funding decision, but there are a number of other laws and policies the draft EIS will inform. Some examples include the Endangered Species Act, Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act, and the National Historic Preservation Act. Chapter 5 summarizes the means of compliance with all statutes, orders, and policies. Chapter 6 lists the names and qualifications of the individuals primarily responsible for writing the draft EIS. Chapter 7 discusses the past, ongoing, and future public involvement opportunities associated with this review. Also, the draft EIS is littered with acronyms. Chapter 8 has a list of all of them in alphabetical order for your reference. And Chapter 9 is the index, which gives page numbers where keywords and topics can be found throughout the draft EIS. I like to think of Chapter 10 and the appendices as our way of showing our work. Chapter 10 gives a reference list of all the best available science and literature used to help with the analysis and drafting of the EIS. The appendices are approximately 6,000 pages of 20 technical reports, studies, and analysis that was considered when drafting the EIS. The modeling and technical reports that I mentioned today earlier by CPRA can be found in this part of the document. Before I wrap up, I want to remind you that the draft EIS for the proposed Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion project is a large document that can be technical. It is available for the casual reviewer with the executive summary, comparative summary of alternatives table, and the table of contents to help you find areas in the draft EIS of your interest. From there, it ranges in complexity as you read through the draft EIS chapters, ending with Chapter 10 and the appendices for those who really want to dig deep into the analysis. In conclusion, I want to thank you for your participation and remind you that your comments play an important role in our process. So please send us your feedback by May 4th, 2021, by either the comment portal we discussed earlier, by traditional mail to the Corps of Engineers, and if you prefer to provide oral comments, please leave a message at 211-211-9205. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers who recorded those presentations. If you'd like to watch the videos again, they are available on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers website at the link that is now being circulated in the webinar chat. Now we're going to start the public comment portion of this morning's meeting. When you registered for the webinar, we asked if you wanted to make a comment during the meeting. At this time, we currently have 8 people signed up to give comment. We will keep the webinar running for public comment for the next 2 hours or so. If you did not sign up to speak but would like to do so, please simply type your name into the questions box. And again, if you did not sign up to give public comment and you would like to do so, just simply type your name into the questions box and we will be able to call upon you. I'll pause at this time and give our interpreters a chance to give instructions in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Khmer. Ms. Soto.
Thank you. Ahora comenzaremos la sección de comentarios del público de la reunión. Cuando se registró para el seminario web, le preguntamos si quería hacer un comentario durante la reunión. Durante las siguientes 2 horas o más continuaremos con el seminario web para comentarios del público. Llamaremos a la persona por su primer nombre y al mismo tiempo el nombre de la siguiente persona en la lista, de modo que tenga algo de tiempo para prepararse. Cuando llamemos su nombre, quitaremos el modo mudo de su línea y tendrá 3 minutos para hablar. Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Nguyen.
Bây giờ chúng ta sẽ bắt đầu phần bình luận công khai của cuộc họp. Khi bạn đang ký hội thảo trên web, chúng tôi đã hỏi bạn có muốn đưa ra nhận xét trong cuộc họp không. Chúng tôi sẽ tiếp tục chạy hội thảo trên web để lấy ý kiến công chúng trong 2 giờ tới hoặc lâu hơn. Chúng tôi sẽ gọi tên của 10 người đầu tiên và đợi thời tiên của người tiếp theo trong hàng để bạn có một chút thời gian chuẩn bị. Khi chúng tôi gọi tên bạn, chúng tôi sẽ bật tiếng đường dây của bạn và bạn sẽ có 3 phút để nói. Tôi sẽ trực tiếp dịch nếu bạn cho ý kiến bằng tiếng Việt. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. T.
ឥឡូវនេះយើងនឹងចាប់ផ្ដើមកម្មវិធីស្ដាប់មតិសាធារណៈនៃកិច្ចប្រជុំនេះនៅពេលដែលអ្នកចុះឈ្មោះចូលរួមសិក្ខាសាលាតាមអ៊ីនធឺណិតនេះយើងបានសួរថាតើអ្នកចង់ផ្ដល់មតិក្នុងអំឡុងពេលប្រជុំឬអត់យើងនឹងបន្តសិក្ខាសាលាតាមអ៊ីនធឺណិតនេះសម្រាប់ស្ដាប់មតិសាធារណៈក្នុងរយៈពេលជិត 2 ម៉ោងយើងនឹងហៅឈ្មោះបុគ្គលទី 1 និងឈ្មោះបុគ្គលបន្ទាប់ក្នុងជួររងចាំក្នុងពេលតែមួយដើម្បីឲ្យអ្នកមានពេលខ្លះក្នុងការត្រៀមចាំសម្រាប់ឡើងឲ្យយោបល់នៅពេលយើងហៅឈ្មោះអ្នកយើងនឹងបើកសំឡេងខ្សែទូរស័ព្ទរបស់អ្នកហើយអ្នកមានរយៈពេល 3 នាទីសម្រាប់ឲ្យយោបល់របស់អ្នកសូមអរគុណ Thank you.
Thank you, translators. At this time, I'd like to remind you that representatives of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, CPRA, and NOAA, and other Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group members, including the U.S. Department of the Interior and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, are on the webinar to listen to your public comments. The representatives will listen to your comment. However, panel members may provide clarifications and information. As a reminder, all attendees are muted automatically. We will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. Also, if you are viewing the webinar and have called in using a phone or planning to speak, you must enter your individual audio PIN, and please enter with a pound sign in front of the PIN and a pound sign on the back end of the PIN. Note, that this PIN is different than the access code. Please also follow any notifications to unmute yourself. As shown on the slide, if you are using the phone, please make sure your computer's audio is not selected. We will call the first person's name, and at the second time, the name of the next person in line, so that you will have a little bit more time to prepare. When we call your name, we will unmute your line, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. I thank you in advance for respecting the 3-minute rule. Please state your name, and if you're representing an organization, please state the name of the organization prior to making your comments. At this time, to get started, our first speaker is George Ricks, followed by Jason Smith. Please proceed, Mr. Ricks, with your comment.
Thank you, sir. This is Captain George Ricks. I'm president of the Save Louisiana Coalition. Firstly, I'd like to say the least environmentally damaging alternative to this project, pipeline sediment delivery or dredging, was not used in this EIS. Under section ES2, proposed need of this project, EIS states this proposed project is needed to help restore habitat and ecosystem services injured in the northern Gulf of Mexico as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. This project, given the permanent adverse impacts to fisheries, marine mammals, and water quality, is in total contradiction of this purpose and need. Under mitigation, the total of $305 million for mitigation to seafood industries and dolphins is ridiculously low. I would like to point out the 120-day spillway opening in 2019, which caused a declared fisheries disaster of $258 million, this one-time event. This disaster was caused by the same river water that this project is designed to put into the estuary. Given the permanent adverse impacts and collateral injuries of this project, the few long-term benefits do not justify the cost of construction, nor the economic loss to fisheries, low-income families, and flooding of coastal communities affected. The Save Louisiana Coalition recommends this permit application be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks.
Thanks, Captain Ricks. Making sure my microphone's working here, and it appears that it is. Your comments are technical in nature, as to be expected with your experience in the basin. It's certainly something that we can take into consideration for the final EIS. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Next individual to speak will be Jason Smith, followed by John Troutman. Mr. Smith, please make your comment. If you're having difficulty with the audio, please remember to put a pound sign in front of the pen and then a pound sign again. You may be also self-muted, Mr. Smith, if you'll unmute yourself, as we're not hearing you. We'll come back to Mr. Smith, and we'll proceed with Mr. John Troutman. Mr. Troutman, please proceed. Please proceed, Mr. Troutman. You're up now. And if you'll unmute yourself. If Mr. Smith and Mr. Troutman, are you there?
This is John Troutman. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, sir. Please go ahead and state your name for the record. And if you're representing an organization, the name of the organization, and you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Yes, this is John Troutman. I am with CPRA, and I did not intentionally ask to speak, so somehow I got there. Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, you may have to go on your computer audio, and you still may be self-muted. Let's go to our next individual to give comment, and that will be Mr. Robert Gardner, followed by Scott McGarry. Robert Gardner. If you're self-muted, if you would just simply unmute yourself, hit the little microphone symbol and unmute yourself. Robert Gardner. You can go ahead and proceed, Mr. Gardner. You're now unmuted. So let me just go back while these individuals are working through their audio issues. As a reminder, everyone is automatically muted, and we will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. Also, if you're viewing the webinar and have called in using a phone and are planning to speak, you must enter your individual audio PIN number. And to do that, you'll need to put in a £, the audio PIN, and then a £, again. And then you'll be brought live into the queue. So let's see if we have any individuals who are able to do that. Mr. Robert Gardner, are you with us? Next, we'll go to Scott McGarry. Okay, it sounds like you have both the phone and the computer audio on, Mr. McGarry. Mr. Robert Gardner, are you? Mr. Scott McGarry, you're next in the queue. Scott McGarry to give public comment. We think Mr. McGarry is with his dog at this moment, and we'll give him a second. Okay, let's move on. Go ahead. Ms. Rosa Dusang, if you can prepare yourself, you're next in the queue. Rosa Dusang. Okay, we have a team reaching out to these individuals, and we'll just give them a moment to see if we can't get them connected. Okay. So at this time, looks like we're going to reach out to these individuals and get them queued properly. And at this moment, we're going to go to a break, and we'll continue to monitor the queue and get individuals connected properly. And please, if you are listening, stay tuned, stay online, and we're going to go to a momentary break to give these individuals an opportunity to get connected properly. Thank you so very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got a couple of our commentors back online. Let's go ahead and give our listening panel a moment to get back up. And we thank you for your patience. And again, if you're listening to this webinar and you would like to give public comment, just simply type your name into the questions box and we will get you into the speaking queue, and a person will reach out to you to give you personal instructions of how to best connect. Let's go back to Jason Smith. Mr. Smith, you have 3 minutes to give your public comment. And if you're representing an organization, please state the name of your organization. Jason Smith, please proceed. And Scott McGarry, I think we also have you in the queue. So, Mr. McGarry, if you can hear my voice, please unmute yourself and proceed as well. It appears, Mr. Smith, you are self-muted. Okay, let's toggle back to Mr. Scott McGarry. You can go ahead and proceed. Let's proceed with Mr. Robert Gardner. You are next in the queue.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Mr. Gardner. Sounds like you have the audio sources. If you can mute one of those, you have an echo. Okay, if you're speaking, Mr. Gardner, we cannot hear you. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
We can. There's an echo, but we can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Oh.
We can.
Sorry.
Please proceed with your name, and if you're representing an organization, state the name of your organization and you're up for your public comment.
If that gentleman is on the phone, he may need to mute his computer speakers.
Right.
And just to remind everyone, we are here for a block of time, and so we're going to get this worked out with these individuals. We have individuals who are contacting these individuals to try to get their audio connection configured correctly. And I think, Mr. Gardner, you're both on your computer audio and phone audio. If you'll just drop one of those, then we can hear you. And we think he's calling back in right now. At one point, there were 3 connections. And Mr. Scott McGarry or Jason Smith, if you're still with us, we'll love to hear your comment as well. So it appears we have many individuals online, but not many have indicated that they would like to give public comment. And again, that's a portion of the meeting that we're at this moment. We've concluded the presentation, and this is when, if you would like to give a public comment, you can go and type your name into the questions box, and then we will reach out to you to give you further instruction of how to give your comment. We will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. Also, if you're viewing the webinar and have called in using a phone and are planning to speak, you must enter your individual audio PIN number. It's a 5-digit number, but you need to put in the # first, the 5-digit PIN number, and then the # again. And if you self-muted yourself when it is your turn, you'll need to unmute yourself when you're in. And Mr. McGarry, we think that you are self-muted. Ms. Shannon Loop, please proceed. Shannon Loop.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, I am on the Wilkinson Canal in Myrtle Grove, and I guess my concern is what's going to happen with the water in Myrtle Grove Estates when this, or if this happens, and what are the plans for that? I'm under the impression that they are talking about possibly raising bulkheads or buying out the people in the community, and that actually frightens me. Am I going to get an answer?
Yes, thank you for your comment. I think we did address that in the EIS. So give us a second here. We'll find that information in the document for you and direct you as well to the rest of the folks on the line where to find that information. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Loop. And Mr. Laborde will loop back with more information on your comment. Again, other individuals who are in the queue at this time are Jason Smith, Scott McGarry, Robert Gardner,
And Perry, I have a note here that Jason Smith declined to comment. That was an error in the registration.
Thank you very much. So while we're waiting for individuals to submit their name into the questions box, if they would like to give a public comment, again, there was a presentation. If those of you who are just joining us missed that presentation, And that presentation will be posted in several locations, and we'll give you that information before we sign off. And so we want everyone to be aware of the presentation that was given earlier.
So if things do seem busy on our end, we do have some material coming through on the chat aside from some of our technical issues here. I can go ahead and go through some of those comments and provide some responses there. Let's see, let's start from the top. And this is going back to when we were going through the pre-recorded presentations. Can the webinar be played back for someone who was unable to attend? The answer to that is yes. All of these meetings will be recorded. We'll also have transcripts available shortly after these meetings wrap up, and we'll have that available on the core webpage. So that is one way people can watch the meetings that were unable to participate either today, tomorrow, or Thursday evening. There was a question about the pre-recorded audio being played earlier. Yes, that was pre-recorded, all three presentations by myself, Mel Landry with NOAA and the TIG, as well as Brad Barth at CPRA. Those presentations are available as well on the core Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion webpage. There was a question during the pre-recorded presentations if folks from the core, CPRA, and the TIG were listening in, and indeed we were all here, and that's some feedback. Maybe for the next meetings we'll we'll present ourselves a little sooner so that folks who participate know that we're here. There was a question about wording. Restore elements injured versus restore injuries. That's something that we'll take into consideration. There was an additional comment about the timing of diversion operation with larval recruitment. And that's something that we did look into as part of our review. That's available in chapter 4, section 10 or 4.10. That would be the aquatic resources section, and then 4.25, which is the cumulative impact section. We had a question about languages and translations. We do have the executive summary available in Vietnamese and Spanish. We published our first public notice, which had a list of where the libraries here in South Louisiana, where those executive summaries in the different languages are available. So that's also on our webpage for review. There's a lot of frustration here about the sound issues, and look, I understand, you know, we're doing what we can on our end to straighten those issues up. We do have other ways that you can provide comments, which we talked about in the presentation. We have mail, we have the commenting portal, we have the toll-free number. And, you know, if you did plan to comment today and you've run into trouble, those are ways to comment. Those comments will be reviewed by us and they'll have equal weight. So there's no difference in the way that people plan to comment. There was another chat question about narrowing passes down at the southernmost portions of the Barataria Basin. That was not an alternative that we had considered for this EIS. That is something that we've here in regulatory had questions and maybe some applications for in the past. However, none of those projects have been advanced to my knowledge. Let's see, I'm still going down the list here. We had a chat comment from Ms. Cornish from the Marine Mammals Commission that shows that they do plan to submit written comments, which again, we appreciate. And there's a request for an extension. Those of you out there that are looking for an extension of time, please make that part of your comments. Once you submit those comments, we have folks monitoring them real time. So we'll receive those and take that extension request into consideration. Let's see. We had an additional comment here about water quality, nitrogen and phosphorus with respects to hypoxia, which is experienced in the Gulf of Mexico. There's a question about whether what the impacts to that might be, and that is something that we can consider for our review of the in drafting of the final EIS. Are we planning to build islands in Barataria Bay to slow tidal water down? That was not a specific alternative that we reviewed. However, we did look at building terraces in the basin, as I mentioned in the presentation, to service sediment catchers and to slow down some of the flows. So it is something that we considered further. We have a couple more. I can stop there and see if we have people queued up for a comment from there, Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Laborde. And while this slide is up, let me just remind everyone, as Mr. Laborde mentioned, that there's several ways to submit your public comment on the draft EIS or NRDA RP. And all of these will have equal weight, as he mentioned. The comment period ends on May 4th, 2021. And you can submit them electronically with that top URL. You can submit them written via US mail, or you can call in 866-211-9205 and give an oral comment via that toll-free number, and you'll be given 4 minutes to do so. We do have a few individuals who are in the queue at this time. Let's go with Dinah Epley, followed by Amanda Moore.
Hi, this is Dina Epley. Can you hear me?
We can, Dina. Thank you.
Okay.
Representing an organization, please state the name of the organization.
I am not representing an organization, but I am a homeowner in one of the communities that are going to be impacted by this. And I mostly had some questions, and hopefully this is an appropriate forum to ask the questions. I put a couple of them in the chat box, but the first one was I just wanted to understand what we meant by sustain 20% of the land. That's unclear to me. Does that mean this diversion project is going to allow us to keep 20% of the land we have now? Are we adding 20% of the land? And that if we're adding, what is that based on? Today's levels or future levels? What does that mean?
Thank you. We'll try to get some clarity on that, as well as update the group that's on the line today where that information might be available in the EIS.
Okay. So we're going to give you that information. Ms. Epley, the team is looking through the information at this moment. Does that conclude your comment, Ms. Epley? Okay. The next individual to give public comment is Amanda Moore. Please proceed.
Do you hear me?
We do.
Excellent. My name is Amanda Moore. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation and also with the Restore the Mississippi River Delta campaign. We appreciate all of the work that has gone into this draft EIS and restoration plan. And we want to acknowledge that the Barataria Basin is losing land at one of the most rapid rates in the world and was also ground zero for the BP oil spill. So losing this marsh means that we're losing fish and wildlife that depend on that habitat. And in addition, we're losing the storm surge protection that the marsh provides. The power of the river allows us to harness more land building potential than we could get with dredges at a fraction of the cost. And the benefits are long lasting, even in the face of sea level rise and hurricanes. This project is innovative and widely studied, and this project concept is our best shot at a vibrant and resilient future for fish, wildlife, and communities in the Mississippi River Delta. Mid-Baritaria sediment diversions is going to have major beneficial impacts with the land building that the project will provide compared to a future without action. And we also want to acknowledge that the sediment introduced by the diversion will not only build wetlands, but it will also increase the bed elevation across 100 square miles in Barataria Basin. And this will create more complex habitat that's favored by some fish and wildlife. And it will also help reduce the storm surge threats to nearby communities. We feel that's a really important benefit of the project. In short, we feel the project is essential to a sustainable and more resilient future in the Delta, and we want to thank you again, and we're going to be submitting more detailed comments before the comment period closes.
Great. Thanks for your feedback. And yes, to update the group, I mean, if you comment today, feel free to comment multiple times. As you're going through this document, you may comment on something and then come across something additional that you may want to provide feedback on. So that's certainly okay with us and appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. We will have Ms. Mary Tucker next, and then Ms. Dina Epley will come back to you. So next up is Mary Tucker.
Good morning. My name is Mary Tucker, and I am a resident in Myrtle Grove. I am not representing the subdivision or the board. I am simply representing myself and my family. And while I appreciate the comments from the previous lady with the wildlife and fisheries, I respectfully disagree. It's a great idea to build the marsh until it's not. And yes, there are some benefits for some. However, to the people of Myrtle Grove, we have identified, and I think everybody knows there is a problem, that more days than not, we will probably have water on the road. In some of the previous meetings I've been at, it was stated that, you know, it should not be that detrimental because these houses are raised and most of them are camps. However, these really aren't camps. These are people's homes. Most of them are $500,000 homes that people have invested their life savings and work into. We bought in this community because I wanted my kids to be able to ride their bikes on the streets, to play kickball in the lots. We wanted to fish off of our docks. And if the water continuously comes up when the diversion is operating, it's going to ruin the streets. Yes, if you raise infrastructure, i.e. the streets, I can access my property. However, my house was totally built to code. When I would get out of my car, I'd probably have water around my ankles. I do know that there is money to mitigate certain subdivisions. We still want clarity on how much money is available. I think the last meeting I listened to, it said 300 million. That's not just for Myrtle Grove. That's Myrtle Grove, that's Susie Bayou, Happy Jack, Wood Park, and I think a few others. They talked about buyouts, which would not be my first choice. A question is, how do they determine fair market value? So there are a lot of unknowns, and I guess I could say I'm against the diversion, and I would like some answers, please.
Thanks, Ms. Tucker. That's a good comment, and you know, thanks for expressing your concerns. We had a comment about Myrtle Grove earlier as well. So just to let the group know, the impacts that you're referencing are discussed in section 4.20. That's the public health and safety section. We also discuss it in section 4.13, which is socioeconomics. And we also have some additional information in section 4.27 with respect to mitigation for these impacts. We will take those comments that you've made today into consideration. If you do check out those sections of the EIS, or if you haven't already, and you have some additional feedback you'd like to provide to us, we'd certainly appreciate that, either using the phone number that we talked about earlier, the comment portal. There's another one.
US mail.
Thank you. Snail mail. Yeah, that's it from me, Perry. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Tucker. We're going to go back to Ms. Dina Epley. Okay, looks like she's dropped off. Let's proceed with Steve Pollock. Mr. Pollock, are you on? I think you're self-muted. If you will unmute yourself. You should be able to speak, Mr. Steve Pollock. Okay, while Mr. Pollock is getting his audio levels together, Ms. Tucker, I think you have additional comment you'd like to offer. Ms. Mary Tucker.
Hi, thanks for letting me ask another question. I have read over, of course, not all 6,000 documents, and it might not be 6,000 pages, but I have looked in the sections that were just referenced, I think, by Mr. Brad, but I could not find, and maybe these are one-off questions, specific answers. They were broad strokes, and maybe we're not to that point yet, but how things are determined, fair market value, how that is determined, house raising, who determines how high they would raise, you know, structures if they choose to go that route. And I'm not trying to belabor the issue.
No, I understand that. And for some of these more specific details, we might need to go back and investigate that further for the final EIS and provide a more thorough response one way or the other.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Steve Pollock, can you hear us? If you can, you're now in the queue to proceed.
All right, sir, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, let me pop this up here. So my name's Dr. Steve Pollock of Triple N Oysters. I've been in the oyster industry in the state of Louisiana for 6 years now. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada, so a bit of an oddball down here. But in looking over the EIS, I'm extremely worried about the short and long-term consequences of the planned Mid-Baritaria diversion. On the one hand, the EIS seems to support the idea that environmental damage will be immediate, long-lasting, and severe for the state of Louisiana, yet turns the other side of the card over and says that it looks like it's probably going to be beneficial in the next 50 years. The EIS does not clearly show that the benefits will outweigh the costs of going through with this project, and in my opinion, other alternatives should be seriously considered to minimize the severe impacts to the Louisiana fisheries, the communities, and the entire Gulf Coast ecosystems by opening up the diversion in the Mid-Baritaria region. That's my comment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Pollock.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and just pause for a moment to see if others will go into the queue and to put their names into the questions box. And so we have well over 100 individuals who are participating at this moment. And so at this moment, we are awaiting for additional public commentors. And to do that, simply type your name into the questions box, and then we can give you the instructions that you need in order to make your comment via this webinar. And so we'll just give a few moments here to allow individuals to do that. And Ms. Laborde, if you have any other clarifications, at this moment, we do not have any other speakers in the queue.
Okay. So I can pick up where I left off with respect to the information that we're getting via the chat. There's a question about not having a comment, but having a specific question. Yes, that is something that's allowed, but I think our intention here today is just to get the full amount of public feedback that we can receive, and our responses would be more generalized to direct you to the location where that information may be available to you in the EIS or the NERDA restoration plan. Certainly, if there's a question that we feel like can't be answered with that, then that would be something that we'd have to further consider for the final. There's a question about if the diversion does build land and closes off main bayous, will those bayous then be dredged? The answer is yes and no. There may be some waterways that are maintained, but in general, it's probably less likely. There's more information that can be found on that in our mitigation section. So again, that's going to be Chapter 4, Section 27, 4.27. And that will cover the CPRA's proposed plan for impacts to navigation channels. There's a comment from Miss Morris that again is requesting a time extension. Again, with folks who plan on commenting, please make those requests known to us, and we'll consider those as we receive them. There's a complaint about diversity on the panel, and there being some disappointment there. I get that. I've brought it up in some of our prior meetings. I think some of what we've tried to do is limit the amount of people that you're seeing on the panel. And as a result, some people got dropped off. I would suggest that you look at the list of preparers. We do have great men and women that are on this team, and it's something that we can consider for the second and third meetings here with respect to diversity. So I appreciate that comment. Will the diversion flow constantly or be opened at certain times? So I believe it was in Brad Barth's presentation, but there is a proposed at this time base flow of 5,000 CFS. And beyond that, it would depend on river flows. So there is some additional information that could be found there in the alternative section for each one of the diversions that we've considered throughout the EIS. There's some more concern about Myrtle Grove. That's understandable. Again, to reiterate, the impacts are discussed in section 4.20, that's public health and safety, as well as 4.13, which is socioeconomics. There's some concern about the long and short-term consequences, and this may tie into Mr. Pollack's live comment, which I believe we addressed with there being, or not addressed, but we'll take into consideration.
It looks like we have an individual to give public comment.
Okay.
All right, so let's proceed with John Tesvik with the oyster industry participants. Please proceed.
Hello, do you hear me?
We do. Please
All right.
proceed. State your name for the record, sir.
Yes, it's John Tesvich. I'm on the Louisiana Oyster Task Force. And I'd just like to add a couple of things to the conversation. Listening to the presentation. One thing is on alternatives that were considered. I was disappointed that some real alternatives weren't part of that. Instead of just looking at no action and various levels of flow, there are things that have been suggested across many public hearings. One is coalmates. It's colmata. It is actually levying the outflow of the diversion to take a part of Barataria Bay at a time and rebuild that part without affecting the larger area of the basin. Instead of allowing the water just to go throughout the basin, depending on the wind and currents, coalmates will take one section and we build one section at a time. That is an alternative that would severely reduce the flooding, the indirect impacts to the seafood industry. So it has not been given, I feel, a serious consideration. The other thing is that the mitigations, the numbers that I saw you put up there about the oysters and shrimp, brown shrimp and dolphin, they are way, way off. You're off by an order of magnitude. $30 million and $50 million, those are what's going to be the annual losses, and plus. So, by downplaying the impacts, the negative impacts, you're justifying the diversion. When you take it to a level 10 times higher than that, then you'll see alternatives. And that's where coalmates, are y'all familiar with coalmates? Coalmates are levying the sides and providing a channel straight to the Gulf. So that is something I'd like to see a little more work and research into. It's an ancient form that was used in Egypt. It was used in Italy, and it can work here to make this actually a lot better project, because otherwise this is going to be problematic. The seafood industry has been talking about this, from the beginning of this discussion 10, 15 years ago. And I just think, it's time that we sit down and get more serious about these negative impacts. Thank you for your opportunity to comment.
Yeah, and certainly, thank you for your comment. Some of the things that you hit on reminded me of some scoping comments. The term coalmate, going back to 2017, it's hard to recall a specific comment, but if there is something there that we need to address and look into further, we certainly will do so for the final EIS.
And we want to thank everyone. The chat seems to be very popular this morning. We have many individuals offering comment and questions via the chat. So that is an active way to communicate. And it seems as though that you're taking advantage of that. And so, Mr. Laborde, at this time, that was the last speaker. And if you have any other comments based on the chat, we can proceed.
Okay. I think we had some things come through that some of the other panelists may be able to address. I don't know if we'd like to do that now, or it's something that maybe we could do after a short break here. So I'll leave that on the table and somebody can stop me if and when we should do that. And in the meantime, I'll go through some of the chat items. So we have one about other alternatives being considered. Some of the alternatives that you see in the EIS, that's the items that we carried forth. It certainly is not the list of alternatives that we looked at as a whole. So Chapter 2 provides a good write-up of some of the other restoration techniques that we had reviewed, as well as Appendix D of the EIS gives a more detailed analysis of the process that we went through in landing on the alternatives that we did. In addition to that, Chapter 2 should lay out for you why certain alternatives were or were not carried forward for the in-depth analysis of the EIS. To follow back on Ms. Tucker's comment about raising houses and fair market value, I think that that is something that can be considered when we move forward to drafting the final EIS. And just to remind the folks that are involved with the meeting today that the mitigation is something that we will go back to CPRA for feedback on, and they would ultimately be the ones that would be responsible for implementing these actions if we can issue a permit for the project as proposed. There was a chat comment that listed the number of times folks were flooded in Happy Jack. In addition to Myrtle Grove, Happy Jack is an area that we looked at for the EIS. We'll make that comment part of the public record. And in addition to that, I would direct you again to section 4.27, the mitigation summary for information on that. We did get a live comment about annual losses associated with the oyster industry. Appreciate that comment, and we'll consider that for the final as well.
Hi, Brad, if I could jump in real quick. We do have, and you've mentioned them, a number of comments related to the evaluation of other alternatives besides diversions. From a Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group perspective, I want to make sure folks are aware that in the strategic restoration plan for the Barataria Basin that the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group put together, that was Restoration Plan and Environmental Assessment number 3. You can take a look in there for some of the evaluation we did regarding non-diversion alternatives. And in fact, we selected, the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group did 3 alternatives as part, or 3 features as part of our preferred alternative, including 2 non-diversion features, including large-scale marsh creation and ridge restoration in the Barataria Basin. And both of those efforts are funded and approved for construction, and we expect construction to begin this year. But again, you can take a look at the strategic restoration plan for the Barataria Basin located on the trustee's website for additional information on that evaluation.
Thank you, Mel. And we're just going to pause for a second to see if any others submit their names into the questions box to get into the speaking queue.
Yeah, and I think I'm up to date with the chat, the updates on the chat. So certainly if there's someone out there who had a comment that was in the chat that maybe you didn't feel like got addressed or acknowledged today, re-enter it, so you can be assured that we've put eyes on it.
Okay. So I think at this time, I'm going to propose a break, Mr. LaBorde. And let's go into a break until 11 p.m. or 11 a.m., I'm sorry, Central. We don't need a 12-hour break. 11 a.m. Central, and we'll just simply continue to monitor. If your name goes into the questions box, we'll continue to monitor, and then we'll reactivate our cameras at 11 a.m. and continue forward. So I encourage all of our more than 100 participants to continue to submit your comments and questions via the chat. And if you'd like to make a verbal comment, please submit your name into the questions box, and we'll have you in the queue when we come back at 11 a.m. So at this moment, we'll take a quick 10-minute break, and we will be back shortly. Thank you. Okay, we would like to welcome everyone back. That was a quick 10-minute break. And we just want to thank you again for joining us with the Mid-Baritaria Sediment Diversion virtual public meeting to learn about the project, to gain additional insights about the project, and also to allow you to offer your public comment with regards to the project. Just want to remind everyone that the public comment period ends on May 4th. And today is only one mechanism or path to give your public comment. You can go online, and we will put that URL up for your information. You can use U.S. Postal Service to physically mail in your comment. You can put things into the chat box, and that seems to be a very popular method this morning. Individuals putting their thoughts and comments into the chat box, and Brad Laborde has been going through that list and ensuring that we acknowledge your information in the chat. Some of you have had difficulty with your audio if you are joining this webinar via your computer and you are having difficulty with either the pen or the microphone. In the GoToWebinar interface, there's a little microphone icon. If that icon is red when it is your turn in the queue to speak, please just click on that with your mouse, and it should be green before you begin to speak. At this time, we do have one individual who would like to give public comment, and that is Doug Daigle. If you can hear us, Doug Daigle, please proceed. You'll be given 3 minutes to give your public comment. And if you're representing an organization, please state the name of your organization. Doug Daigle. You should be in the queue properly, Mr. Daigle. And if your microphone is green, you should proceed to your comment. Okay. If you'll proceed to chat, Mr. Daigle, seems as if you are you're going to chat your comment or question in, and we'll get that and make sure that we acknowledge. Mr. Daigle, if you can hear my voice, you're next up to give your public comment. Okay, he's connected. He may have stepped away, but he's also acknowledged he may send it in via chat.
I do see a chat from Mr. Daigle. It has to do with the lack of a reference, perhaps, with respect to the Gulf Hypoxia Action Plan. And just to reiterate, and I think I alluded to this in our presentation or the pre-recorded presentation, that at least for the Corps, you know, we're still in evaluation phase. We're making sure that the EIS is based off the best available science, engineering, and information available to us. So if folks out there have references or information that they'd like to suggest we take a further look at, then they can make that part of their comments, and we'll certainly do so in preparation for the final EIS.
Great. And he acknowledged he would like to submit via chat only. Thank you, Mr. Daigle.
All right. Trying to keep up with the chat here. We have more comments about the Myrtle Grove community. which is one of the more prominent responses that we've gotten today, which is good feedback. So sorry if you've heard this a couple times already, but information about that can be found in section or chapter 4.13, socioeconomics, chapter 4.20, public health and safety. We also have information about mitigation in section 4.27. You know, the flooding issue is something that will be considered with our permit decision. We have a number of things, both pro and con, that we'll have to weigh before we make our decision on whether or not to issue or deny CPRA's permit. So thank you for your feedback. There's an additional comment here about road elevation and Happy Jack. It seems that there's been some recent construction to raise roads there, and it looks like the concern is that the potential additional water that the diversion might bring, if constructed, would maybe negate that progress. So that is something that we can also take into consideration. And another point to take a look at the mitigation measures and provide your input on that if you haven't already. So thank you for that. We got anything else, Perry?
No, sir. There are no others in the queue to speak at this moment. And if there are any further clarifications, we can do those. And if not, we'll just pause as we invite others who may want to give a verbal comment. Again, just type your name into the questions box and we'll get you into the speaking queue.
Yeah, and just to go back to some of the things that we may have discussed earlier, I do have an eye on the attendees list, and it has dropped, but you know, it's hard to tell who maybe has dropped off, and maybe we've gotten some new folks on the line. So if you did miss the presentations, those are pre-recorded and available on the core webpage, along with information about where the paper or you know, some of the more tangible pieces of both the executive order, executive summary, and EIS are available at some of our local libraries here. So our public notice lists those as well. Again, it's on the Corps Mid-Baritaria public webpage. In addition to some of the comments that we've gotten on water levels and flooding, we did get some feedback about timing of the diversion with respect to larval recruitment. I'd like to once again point folks to section 4.10, the aquatic resources section, as well as the cumulative impact section, which is 4.25.
And earlier there was a question regarding who is actually participating in this morning's webinar. In addition to the representatives of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and NOAA and CPRA that you see on the screen, there are also other Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group members, including the U.S. Department of the Interior, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who are involved with this morning's webinar and are listening. And so I just wanted to reiterate that as well.
So Perry, I feel like the awkward silence and being on a bad date here. So I don't know if we want to run through some of the some more of the chats. We can reiterate some of these things, or we can go ahead and take a break here for 10 or 15 minutes and then hop back on and see if we have some additional folks added to the queue for our last 30 minutes before wrapping up at noon. Totally up to the group.
Very good. There is a commitment to keep the portal open and active for the general public until noon. And so we're not going to conclude this webinar at this time. I think we're going to go on a break again to allow individuals to collect their thoughts. And if they would like to do a verbal question or comment, we invite you again to go and just simply submit your name into the questions box to get into the speaking queue. That's going to remain active. If you want to submit a comment or question via the chat, that's going to remain active during this momentary break. And so at this time, we're going to go into a break until 11:30 a.m., but the portal is active, the portal is open, and then we'll come back and answer any questions at that time. And so if that is agreeable to the panel, we'll go ahead and turn off your cameras. We'll continue to monitor the questions box. We'll continue to monitor the chat box, and we'll come back at 11:30 a.m. Central and continue with this process. All righty, it's about 11:30 a.m. Coming off of break. At the current time, there are no more speakers in the queue to give verbal comment. But for those who may have joined us after the earlier portion of the webinar, there was an approximately 35-minute presentation that was given. That presentation was recorded, and you can go onto the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers website to view that video. You can also view that video in various languages. And so we do have that in place. We do have language translators with us if needed, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Khmer. And so those translators are standing by if someone would like to give a verbal comment and needs assistance. And of course, you can go into the chat, which has been popular this morning. If you want to type a comment or concern or question into the chat box, Ms. Laborde will collect those and respond to those accordingly. So at this time, we again are keeping the portal open if in the event someone has joined us later in the time frame.
Thanks, Perry. I can circle back to some of the chats that we received while we were on break here. We got another one about Happy Jack and the status of the roads leading to that area. And just to reiterate, I believe some of the efforts that were suggested earlier with raising the roads were part of the proposed mitigation measures. So, and there was a comment about rules and restrictions. So that is something that will be considered as we work through and get to the final EIS. We received a comment here about the MRGO and how much land that may have built. The MRGO was built to be a shipping channel. It was a core project, and there are many core documents out there that can be referenced for both its project life and how we wrapped up that as being a federal project. Got a comment here about dredging for land. I think we talked about dredging islands in the basin. There were a couple other suggestions we got today, but I think for the EIS purposes, folks can take a look at Chapter 2, where we talk about the terrace features that we did carry forward as part of our analysis. The idea behind the terraces was to slow down water and to build some additional land, perhaps. And you can find more information about the terraces in Chapter 2 of the EIS. We have a comment about being against the project until it's clear how it will impact residents affected in the communities. Thank you for that comment. We can consider that with the final EIS. Just to point out once again, the water level issues and some of those items are available for your review at section 4.20. There's also a socioeconomic component that folks can look at associated with this project, the alternatives and the no action at 4.13. That's the socioeconomic section once again. There's a chat about buyouts. You know, just to remind folks, CPRA would be responsible for implementing any of the proposed mitigation that's in the EIS, or maybe some of the things that we've brought up today. And those mitigation measures would be considered compensation to offset those impacts. With respect to this, it would be to offset impacts to homes that are in the vicinity of the project. Again, folks can take a look at 4.27, that mitigation section, for additional information there. And again, if you review those sections and you feel like something's missing, then that's certainly something that we would want feedback on. There's a comment about relocating brown shrimp. There is no plan to do that, and I'm not aware of any efforts to do something along those lines. And again, the mitigation plan does have some information about how some of the folks in the industry would perhaps be mitigated for the impact to any loss of service or revenue that they may experience. More on mitigation here about raising roads, boat docks, and homes. Again, 4.27 is our mitigation section where that information can be found. There's a comment here about dumping sand. That is, marsh creation was a coastal restoration tool that we had looked at in more detail and is summarized in Chapter 2. You can also see Chapter 4.25, that's our cumulative impact section, and Section 4.6 to learn more about some of the marsh creation projects that we either currently have on the landscape, we being the state, not necessarily the Corps, just coastal restoration projects in general that are available, or again, cumulative impacts where we talk a little bit about some of the future marsh creation projects and how maybe the diversion would work in conjunction with those marsh creation projects. There's a comment in here about Lake Hermitage and the status of that road. Once again, that's a mitigation measure that's being considered by CPRA and another mitigative measure. And I think that about catches us up here. Okay. As we hit about 20 minutes left here before we wrap up for the day. So there is still some time to provide feedback either via phone, orally, or we can continue to go through the chats as they come through. I know that earlier we had experienced some technical issues, and believe me, we've all transitioned to doing web meetings here. I do multiple a week, and I still have problems. And a lot of people on our group have problems logging into these things. So, you know, it's not a limitation on your end. It's just, you know, sometimes the machine is a little finicky, and you have to maybe hang up or call back in, or try to do some of the other prompts that are available to you out there. Another issue, when we heard that a little bit with the echoing, if you are participating by phone, it is a good idea to mute your computer speakers so we don't get that feedback. I can go ahead and remind folks that, at least for the Corps, we have not made a decision on this project. It's still very much in review. As you all are aware, the draft EIS is, it's another step, both in the public coordination process with us being here with you today, and it's another step in the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act. So back in August 2017, we held scoping meetings to better understand your concerns, and we hope to do that with the development of the draft EIS. We tried to disclose the anticipated impacts with your concerns in mind. So again, thanks for your comment today. Many of you have brought up points that maybe we need to go back and double check and make sure that we're adequate with our responses, make sure that we're applying best science and engineering and best practices. So again, thank you.
Great, and we'll just pause at this time as we await any additional chats or individuals who would like to give a verbal comment. For those who are with us, if you have friends or family or colleagues who cannot participate in today's meeting, this same meeting will be done again. There are going to be 3 public meetings. They're all the same. And so if you've attended today's meeting, please share with others that this meeting will also take place again tomorrow, Wednesday, April 7th at 1 p.m. and then again on Thursday, April 8th at 6 p.m. And so if you have friends, family, or colleagues who would like to also participate and take advantage of this fact learning opportunity, today was not the only opportunity. And so there'll be 2 additional this week. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. and Thursday at 6 p.m.
There are a couple of chats that are rolling here and here that we're working on responses to. So sit tight, please. Okay, it looks like we have a comment here about what are the chances of stopping this project. Not a good gambler. But as I reiterated earlier, you know, the Corps hasn't made a decision on this project. And I think earlier there was a reference to cost benefit, and cost benefit is something that's important for the Corps on the civil works end. For the Corps regulatory side, we don't necessarily do cost benefit ratios. Instead, we do a public interest review, which is us weighing a number of the factors. Many of them we list out in chapters 2 and 3, as well as in the presentation. There's a list of the items that we're looking at to weigh that, those impacts, both pro and con, then throwing in some of the mitigative measures that are being proposed by the applicant in order to make our decision on whether or not to approve or deny CPRA's project or proffer another alternative that we've carried forward in the EIS. There's a comment about impacts to bottlenose dolphins and sea turtles and how many may be killed by this project. I would ask folks who are interested in that to refer to chapter 4. That'd be 4.11. That's the marine mammals section, which would cover impacts for dolphins. And the next section is 4.12, the threatened and endangered species section for impacts to sea turtles there. also, again, this might fall along the lines of cost benefit with respect to how many acres of land could be built, with respect to the price of the project. Folks out there can refer to section 4.2 regarding the acreages of projected land to be built under each one of the alternatives that we carried forth for analysis in chapter 2. Yeah, and with respect to a lot of these comments, from the Corps' perspective, to remind folks, you know, this isn't just a Corps and federal agency effort. The Corps also has a third-party contractor with teams of subject matter experts that cover many different fields, many different people. Chapter 7 has the list of preparers where you can find information on that. Which, you know, lists out for anyone who's interested to see the qualifications and the team that we've put together that is independently reviewing all the material that's going into the document as well as drafting it.
And I'll just remind everyone, there's no one in the queue at this moment to make verbal comment. And if you would like to make a verbal comment before we conclude shortly, to simply just type your name into the questions box and we will call upon you.
And earlier, I think I said chapter 7, but it might be chapter 6 that has that list of scientists and subject matter experts for the EIS. Yep, chapter 6 is the list of preparers. Sorry about that. It's a big document.
If we could go back to the slide of how to comment on the draft EIS and NERDA RP, we can just give those comments again for those individuals. And the biggest takeaway is that May 4th is the final date to give public comment. And again, you can see there's multiple ways to submit comments. You can do it electronically at the first URL. You can do it with US mail to the US Army Corps of Engineers. That just needs to be postmarked on or before the comment deadline, which is May 4th. You can call that 1-866-211-9205 number, and you can give that comment at any time before May 4th at your leisure. And of course, if you did not give verbal comment at today's meeting, this meeting will be replicated again tomorrow at 1 p.m. and also on Thursday at 6 p.m. And so there's multiple ways that you can offer your public comment and also to learn more about this very important project. Thank you, Karen.
right, we've got a question about increasing the dead zone in the Gulf, perhaps as a result of the project. We do discuss hypoxia in the water quality section. That's in chapter 4, 4.5 is where you could find information about that. There's a question about using the money for the diversion for land building. It is a topic that's come up with our review. So there's a money aspect associated with this as well as available sediment. So I think we hit on that a little bit in chapter 2. So I would suggest to check that out and see if that answers your question. If it doesn't, again, it's something maybe you could follow up with us on. I'm showing about 8 minutes left here, and I know that we're going to move into, I guess, our final slides here before we wrap up, but I do want to apologize for some of maybe some of the technical issues that we had early on. It seems like we got it straightened out, so that's a good thing. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that August 2017 is when we did scoping. So we've been working on this for quite some time, and it is good to get it out to you all for different viewpoints and feedback. So it's been much appreciated today.
Well, very good. I would like to thank all of those individuals that have presented and who have been working on this significant matter. Thank you, translators, for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our public comment portion of today's webinar, and we thank you for your participation. If you find that you have additional comments you would like to make, or you were unable to make a verbal comment this morning, please note that you can do so in a number of ways, and you can see on your screen there the ways that you can do it. We appreciate all the input we have received thus far and will continue to receive through May 4th. As a reminder, the feedback you provide will be considered as part of the final EIS and restoration plan that is scheduled to be released in the spring of 2022, which will inform the permit decisions that will be made shortly thereafter. Again, there are 2 additional webinars that if your friends, family, or colleagues would like to participate in, tomorrow 1 p.m., Thursday at 6 p.m. Thank you all for attending this webinar. We hope you found this meeting informative. Have a good rest of your day and evening. Thank you. This concludes today's webinar.